Name is Philip Ayeni. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Information Studies, University of Ottawa here in Canada. I'm working with Professor Limbauka, who is the principal investigator for this project, which is a knowledge synthesis project funded by SSHRC Canada and Genome Canada. And also, we're also working with a colleague from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poland, Immanuel Kuczycki, who is not able to join us today. So I'm presenting on language technologies in scholarly communication, and this presents some of the findings from our systematic review. All right, let's get into it. So just to paint the context of our research, it's not news to, I believe, to most of us in this webinar that English has occupied a privileged position in scholarly communication. And in fact, Mika was talking about, the majority of publications happens to be in English while he was presenting. And so, the requirement for research evaluation, for promotion, for tenure in most higher education institutions currently, requires that people publish in high impact journals, which often equate with publishing in international journals that are published in English language. And so this has pushed other languages to the periphery and that's given English a privileged position. So, and this has led to, more like a single language model of scholarly communication. Although in principle, there's a logic to using a single model for research because everyone who knows the language can participate in the communication. But it also, in practice, it leads to inequity because, for instance, a recent study by Emmanuel et al. Found that it requires more time for non-Anglophones to publish, to read, and to present their study in English. And this can often lead to a situation where we exclude people who are not English speakers from contributing to science, not because they are not competent, but because they are stressed. They have this. It's more timely. It's more financially. It has more financial implication to publish in English because they have to hire editing services, proofreading services, and as such, some of them just withdraw from scholarly communication that has to be in English language. But recently, there is a movement to create a multilingual scholarly communication ecosystem. For instance, the Helsinki Initiative for Multilingual Scholarly Communication in 2019, and also the UNESCO Recommendation for Open Science, which recognizes language as one of the requirements or one of the facets to ensuring open science. But the multilingual scholarly communication comes with a challenge. And the challenge is that if we all contribute to research in our own language, how do we discover and read each other's work? For instance, my native language is Yoruba, but I do my research in English, communication in English in a scholarly setting. And of course, a lot of people have different languages, thousands, if not millions of languages all over the world. And if everyone is publishing in their own language, it will be difficult for us to read each other's work. And this is where translation is very important, and machine translation can help to really achieve this, the purpose of achieving multilingual scholarly communication system. And machine translation, even though dates back to the early 40s, for the past 5 years, there has been a growing development of neural machine translation tools, such as Google Translate, Microsoft Translator, and also recently AI-based data-driven tools such as ChatGPT, which has helped to improve access to scholarly communication. But how are these tools being used for scholarly communication? And this is where our research actually comes to play. And so our objectives of the study, we asked the overarching question that how are translation technologies being used for multilingual scholarly communication in Canada and beyond, because this study is funded by the Canadian funding agency. So we're interested in understanding how translation technologies are being used for multilingual scholarly communication in Canada, but we did not limit it to Canada. We also were interested in what is available in other countries as well. And so in terms of methods, we employ the systematic review approach because, it has the potential to produce a reliable knowledge synthesis in a systematic and reproducible way, which is different from the other types of review, such as narrative review or traditional review. So this is more systematic, and it could be, when these steps are being followed, it could be reproducible. So in order for us to carry out this systematic review, we developed a set of inclusion criteria, and we included studies that focused on automatic translation or machine translation tools, and also scholarly communication contests, such as discovering scholarly literature, reading scholarly literature, writing a scholarly paper in a different language, or accessing scholarly article in another language. And the third criteria is that if these studies focus on the application and the use of machine translation tools by and for scholars. And that means that we excluded studies that focus on the use of machine translation tools for second language learning, or for physicians communicating with their patients. So we focus on scholars and how they are using machine translation tools for scholarly communication. So we developed a search query, which we applied in 9 bibliography databases, so that we'll be able to cover a broad range of sources and articles. For instance, we carried out this search in Scopus, in Web of Science core collections, in ERIC, in Dimensions, in Erudit, and each of these databases have their own strength and their coverage. So we conducted this search in 4 languages. One of the challenges, or one of the limitations that is often reported in systematic reviews, is that the systematic reviews are often conducted in English. And so they exclude studies conducted or published in other language. But in our case, we conducted research in 4 languages, and we also included studies published outside of these languages by using machine translation tools to translate them, so that we will not exclude any potentially relevant articles in our studies. So total, we retrieved a total of 875 items published between September 2017, January 2017 and September 2023, we created 40 studies for qualitative analysis. Just to touch base on some of the findings, because I won't be able to talk about all the findings in this presentation. So our studies show that neural machine translation tools is the most used tech by scholars. For instance, in 18 studies, 45% of the studies used Google Translate. So Google Translate is the most used machine translation tools for scholarly communication. And this could be because it's easily accessible and it's free of charge. And as a study has shown, that it can translate in more than 130 languages. And also there's interest in large language models. For instance, we only found 2 studies, because we stopped our search in September because of the time limitation of the project. And we found 2 studies that used large language models, LLMs. And of course, you know that it's just recently at the end of 2022 that these models becoming popular. And we expect this to grow in the future. But for now, only few studies are using these models in scholarly communication. But there's an interesting gap that should be noted. There is no evidence of combining machine translation with speech technologies or subtitling tools. So currently, there's a focus on using machine translation for scholarly communication. It's focused on written text, and not so much on spoken words or spoken domain, such as interviews, conferences, and symposia, which are part of scholarly communication. So most of these studies are focused on written text and not so much on the written or the spoken domain. That's an interesting gap that could be for future studies. In terms of translation languages, English is the most used language. English is used in the translation pairs in all the 40 studies, especially as a target language. So what that means is that scholars, non-Anglophone scholars, are using machine translation tools to reduce the burden of preparing English language publications, right? So translation tools are not necessarily happy to displace English, because a lot of people are still translating from their language to English language. And of course, these translation tools, they have the capacity to translate to other languages, even though there's like probably low quality output from low resource languages. But currently, more efforts, the tools are being used to translate into English language. And because this is funded by the Canadian government, we're also very interested in understanding French how French language is being included in studies, and we found that 20% of the studies used French in the language peers, but no study on indigenous languages. So in terms of policy implication, just to wrap up, there's an appetite for publishing languages beyond English. We've seen that 1/3 of the studies of the papers are translating into other languages, right? So there is need to support and implement value structure to encourage publishing in other languages. So there is need to shift responsibility and expectation of non-Anglophone scholars to publish in English. So we need to encourage the use of the tools to access research in other languages, just beyond what is being currently practiced. People are translating into English because of, maybe research evaluation and the other metrics. So there is need to probably, produce meaningful policies that support open access. And, this could help to increase availability of quality data, because we need quality data to be able to make this translation quality very effective. And so large quantity of data and dry kind of data are needed for quality outputs. In conclusion, translation technologies can play an important role in ensuring equity and diversity in scholarly communication, but that technology alone is not enough to achieve or to sustain a multilingual scholarly communication ecosystem. As I've shown to you, and these are some of the references that we included in the study. And thank you so much for your attention. And the full report is available on the repository of University of Ottawa, and I'll put the link here. And this is our contact information in case anyone wants to follow up with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Phillips. That was super interesting, and I think, again, reinforced, I think, a bit of what we figured out through the project, that it's not a simple thing to come up with recommendations. It's yeah, and you almost shouldn't, because we don't know enough in a way, that we need more research and more evidence, but we should still have a clear direction probably, and have some values and ideas for what could be good things to keep in mind when moving forward. But I think we could have a couple of minutes if anyone has questions for Phillips. Yes, Eva, please.
I have a question related to one thing that you noted in your presentation, is that what you need for a good machine translation is having enough, meaning enough in quantity and enough in reliable data. But doesn't that raise another kind of inequity? Because simply languages that have fewer users will have smaller corpuses of data, of language texts, especially in certain domains. So again, you will have poorer results for languages that are already underrepresented. For instance, when I personally use, I don't know, Google Translate to translate something from Finnish, I will not translate it to Croatian because the results will be poor. I will translate that to English. So how do you deal with this new kind of inequity raised by these tools?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm sure that if I don't do well with this answer, Professor Obaka will help me. But so the idea is that though there's an inequity in, I mean, we are not going to probably get to a point where we're able to eradicate all the inequity, but the idea of open access or open data is, even though it's a low resourced language, if the data is available from these languages, for instance, if there is a open a database where these languages can be accessed or accessible, it can be used in developing, the language, or the language for this machine translation, that will help them to develop, to make patching that will make these languages more accessible, right? So it still boils down to open data and making these languages accessible for the machine to be able to use the system, to build upon the system to make effective translation. I think that's that will probably help in a bit, but the inequity might still, because we have the languages are so enormous, we may not be able to get to a point where the machine translation will be able to translate effectively for all the languages, but at least increasing availability of data in these languages can also help develop the system, I think.
Interesting, thank you.